Welcome everyone to FMCC Macau Business Webinar, Macau Gaming at Crossroads, the public tender and beyond. Before the panel discussion, let us welcome FMCC Chairman, Mr. Rutger Verschuren, for the welcome note.
Bonjour, good afternoon, members and friends of FMCC, the France Macau Chamber of Commerce, and followers of Macau Business. As Chairman of the French Chamber, it is a great pleasure to welcome you at our webinar, Macau Gaming at Crossroads, the public tender and beyond. As Macau reaches 3 years of crisis and mostly having relied on gaming to drive any business, making Macau a true world center of tourism and leisure seems out of reach, at least for today, maybe not for tomorrow. While we are waiting for a powerful comeback and recovery after COVID, we are somehow coincidentally in the middle of a tender for the new casino concessions. Everyone is very anxious to know what the future could and will bring us locally and internationally. So a new era is surely around the corner. The French Chamber is glad to join hands with Macau Business Agency to organize this webinar with 3 well-known industry expert panelists, whom I thank for their participation. I thank you all for joining, and I wish you an interesting and fruitful webinar ahead. And here we hand the microphone to José Carlos Matias, Director of Macau Business, to introduce our panelists. Thank you very much and enjoy the show.
Thank you very much, Rutger. Thank you, Stephanie. My great pleasure to host this very important and I believe exciting webinar, and for this cooperation between Macau Business and France Macau Chamber of Commerce. And we're so blessed for having this panel and for holding this such a critical juncture. So I'd like to welcome you all. First of all, the guest speakers and also all those who are joining us via Zoom. It's really meaningful. And without further delay, I mean, I think we all know the context. We all know where we are. We're just not quite sure as for where we're heading to. I know, so that's also a bigger question looming larger in our talk. I'd like to introduce our speakers. We have Jorge Costa Oliveira, founder and CEO of 𝐁𝐮𝐬𝐬 Consultancy, Vitaly Umansky, Managing Director and Senior Analyst at Bernstein, and Alidad Tash, Managing Director at 𝐁𝐮𝐬𝐬. They are all well seasoned, they're all experienced, very highly knowledgeable people and experts when it comes to Macau's casino and gaming industry, and they have a lot to share with us. And I would start with Jorge Costa Oliveira. Good morning, Jorge, joining us from Portugal. And well, it's widely known you, among many roles that you played here in Macau and in the Macau SAR, you were actually a member of the commission for the first public tender to grant casino concessions some 20 years ago. And here we are, 2 decades on, at a very different juncture, different time, different era. How do you look at this from your vantage point, I shall say?
Yeah, good morning, Carlos, and all the participants. Good afternoon there. Well, 20 years have passed, and obviously today we tend to focus on the difficulties that are visible to everybody. Slowdown of China, and especially the dynamic zero COVID policy. But at the end of the day, if you look back, you can see that in structural terms, until 2019, prior to the pandemics, the Macau operation of casino gaming did not change that much. It was still pretty much reliant on VIP gaming, which should be called credit gaming. It is still pretty much, it lies pretty much on partnerships with new investors as time went by, and as the casino operators, the concessionaires, wanted to have less and less exposure. The regulatory environment was not improved. I mean, we did some things. We did the law in 2001. We did some pieces of legislation, but there was no political willingness to go further. You know, for instance, Macau still doesn't have, among its several codes on tax code, doesn't have a code or a piece of legislation regarding the special gaming tax, which is unbelievable. But and we still continue to have a very, very poor degree of monitoring and inspection of gaming activities. The big change, in my opinion, is not that much in the legislation. Everybody's putting their eyes there. There were some amendments, that's it. And some of the things are obvious. So there's a lot of continuity, and there's, which is normal. I mean, Macau government used to be, like in Hong Kong, a coalition between strong businessmen and higher ranking civil servants. The strong businessman disappeared. The one that today leads the government actually is a seasoned politician. I don't think he manages or has managed any relevant company of his family group. So we have a posture of people that are very, very scared with the uncertainty of all this. Beats the hell out of me why they decided so much to go ahead with the tender. But the main difference, in my opinion, lies in the circumstances surrounding the tender. And the circumstances surrounding the tender are very, very different. First of all, there's a huge uncertainty in terms of the economic scenario around. I think that all the tenders must have hired people with crystal balls, because I really don't see how they can foresee what is going to happen in the coming 2 or 3 years, let alone beyond that. And it all depends on visitation from China up to now, and how are the borders going to continue, if the borders are continuing to be closed, and all depends on the zero COVID policy. There's an expectation that after the party congress in October, that will be gradually, and if possible, swiftly changed. But there's really no willingness, and the political speech is actually encroaching on how good it is, the zero COVID policy, which everybody else in the world must be stupid because nobody adopts it. But at the end of the day, this is a huge condition for Macau. And it is very, very difficult. This is a great difference with before, the uncertainty that arises from there. On the positive side, there is a clear willingness on wishing that casino operators target gamblers from other jurisdictions. And when I had a role in that area, I pushed strongly in this direction, but nobody cared, because the Chinese market, or the market of urban China, to be more precise, is so huge, was so untapped. There was so much potential for growth. And the entities that operated there, the gaming promoters, were unwilling to go to new markets because they don't speak languages, they don't feel at ease. And the casino operators, this has to be said in blunt terms, well, became fat cats. They didn't do anything. They were not interested in doing anything. VIP gaming, they send it, they packaged it to the respective junkets, and that's it. The bad thing in terms of overall environment of the tender is the return of the in-kind obligations.
Yeah.
Especially in the terms in which it was put in the law. And this is
something, Jorge, sorry to jump in, and very quickly before we move on. And this is something that actually you have addressed previously, your skepticism towards putting forth as a requirement in-kind obligations, something that is more to do with the pre-liberalization era than with the post-2002 framework, right?
Well, there are two angles there.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right, Carlos. One of the reasons why I don't like in-kind obligations is because the way they were set up with the monopolistic operator before, some of them, they were really, really not obligations. I mean, you are obliged to develop the low type area. I mean, this is a guarantee that you have a huge amount of land. It's a pre-land bank guaranteed in the concession contract. So to call it an obligation is really not the best way of viewing it. So, and many other clauses in the contracts, they were ridiculous. Why should the operators pay for legal translations and things of the kind? And the second reason why I don't like any kind of obligations, it's because it does not make sense. I mean, casino operators have to operate casinos and integrated resorts with correlated activities. period. They pay a high amount of taxes. It's the Macau model, an oligopolistic model with a high level of taxation. With that taxation, the government does whatever it deems to be necessary for the progress and development of Macau. It is up to the government to set up the strategy and the policy and to either operate or open the tenders for hospitals, transportation networks, and whatever you may think in terms of infrastructure. Now, the government apparently does not want to do that. And we are going to have Macau being developed in the coming years by proposals made by casino operators on areas that have nothing to do with gaming. I'm sorry, I'd like to be nice, but this is utterly stupid.
Jorge, I will now bring Vitaly to the conversation, and let's talk about hooking up with what Jorge was just saying. Let's talk about the non-gaming extensive requirements that we can see in the tender program. Were you surprised when you came across the 10+1 points?
Hi, Jose.
Hi, welcome and good afternoon. You're based just next door, so to say, in Hong Kong.
So, look, I think, for the past 10 years, the message from the Macau government has been about development of non-gaming. It was never really defined. I think the operators did what they could in the context of developing integrated resorts. And what we saw over the last 12, 13 years in Macau, and a little bit earlier for the likes of Sands, was the development of large-scale integrated resorts that have many non-gaming features and components. The reality is these are all commercial enterprises, and they build things for the purposes of maximizing profits, and the maximization of profits in a gaming monopoly, which is Macau relative to the greater China market, is to drive gaming customers into Macau. It's not to drive 80-year-old group tours that spend no money in Macau. It's not to drive hordes of children to go to amusement parks. It's to drive high-value customers who can spend money in Macau, both in gaming and non-gaming. And that's been what's happened in Macau for the past 20 years. The government's focus in the current concession process has been to expand the realm of non-gaming by giving kind of broad definitions, almost a hodgepodge of let's throw everything into the pot and see what actually comes out of it. I do not expect all of these potential tourist developments or attractions, or however you want to characterize them, coming to fruition. It's unrealistic. It's not going to happen. All 6 operators are not going to build all these things, and many of these things don't even make any sense. The model that Macau needs to be looking at is Las Vegas, and not just looking at the Strip and saying, wow, there's so many non-gaming amenities, but how did those non-gaming amenities actually come about? And they came about through a partnership between the government and various developers who understood the changes that were taking place in the gaming space in the United States, and decided to effectively, over time, build not just a gaming destination, but an entertainment destination, a tourist destination, a convention destination, because that's what worked for Las Vegas. And that was done in conjunction with the government, who acted as a very good partner, and by the various developers and operators that built new properties in Las Vegas. And that took a very long time to do. Macau has the opportunity and has had the opportunity to do something similar. But as Jorge was referencing, the government seems to constantly just push everything onto the gaming operators, who are often unequipped and unable to deal with things like the development of proper infrastructure, right? The build out of tens of thousands of new hotel rooms if there is limited space in Macau. All of these things matter in order to drive actual tourism. It's very easy to say we want to have more non-gaming tourists. The question is, how do you actually develop that? And that's not going to be done in a vacuum by a single operator or all 6 operators. It's just not realistic.
Interesting. Alidad, well, still talking about this, I think the question is how likely, and I think Vitaly was somehow starting already to address this, how likely are the operators going to move the needle on gaming? And also, when it comes to all these requirements, I mean, we have seen over the years the gaming concessionaires, or at least some of these concessionaires, delivering when it comes to infrastructure development, and also, of course, by having the integrated resource model working in full swing. How do you look at this conversation on non-gaming and the way ahead? And welcome, you are joining us from Macau.
Yes, good talking to you. Actually, I have a couple of very short comments to.
Sure, go ahead.
That's what George said. George had a 7-8 minute answer. I'll have a 1 minute answer to the difference between then and now, 20 years ago and now. 20 years ago, mainland China's government was neutral towards gaming. Now it is anti-gaming. We saw it through anti-corruption, what happened in 2013-14, and it had major effects. It doesn't like gaming, it's holding its nose. The chief executive of Macau, the first chief executive of Macau was pro-gaming. The second chief executive was neutral when it came to gaming. The current chief executive is anti-gaming, which is why we're in the bind we're in right now. So that's the major difference between the three, which is why it is very difficult for the government. Now, let's be fair, mainland China, the mainland government did ask Macau in 2013 and 14 to stop this ostentatiousness by saying this is ridiculous, get rid of junkets, and it didn't, and it didn't, and it didn't until in 2021, last November, it said, you know what, we're doing it ourselves. And basically the head of the top 2 junkets went to this. So Macau sat there, didn't do much. China cleaned it up for itself. As to non-gaming, I agree with Vitaly. I think this is a capitalist enterprise. These people have spent billions of dollars. I think last count something like $35 to $40 billion of capital expenditure has been spent on just building the number of integrated resorts we have in Macau. And the biggest challenge these operators have is it is difficult to get MICE, meetings, incentives, conventions, exhibitions into Macau when they don't control visas. The government needs to play ball. The government needs to partner up. Venetian has one of the largest MICE facilities in the world. And yet, why would anybody from mainland China who can go to Guangzhou, who can go to multiple places within China, who can go to Hong Kong right next to the airport, have to go get a visa to come to Macau, where the visas are not so easily granted? The government needs to also partner up with the government, with the casino operators and the integrated resort operators by opening up the blue cards, allowing people to come in. What we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years has been to basically kick out anybody who is from outside, even though it takes 5, 10, 15, 20 years for a new science, a new area to be shifted to the locals. And right now, if they want us to help out with MICE and help out with museums and theaters, I doubt if they're going to allow the relevant expertise from the outside to come in. So I think those are 2 of the things the government must realize. If you want the IRs to proceed with all these non-gaming, these 11 non-gaming, which I agree with Vitaly, is ridiculously long list, you need to partner up and you need to give them the ingredients so that these integrated resort chefs can make you what you want to actually eat, in this case, non-gaming.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, good point. So when it comes to this is a more political issue. Everything is politics, right? And these days, highly politicized in many ways. I mean, the very own concept of a concession and the difference between a concession and a license. I'm not going into legalities here, but I would like to bring this into a broader context of this so-called common prosperity agenda that it kind of trickles down from the north and actually has this idea of what is supposed to be the role of a large-scale private company and the private sector in the new era. So how do you see this? Alidad, you want to join the conversation? I'm talking about the political era and environment that comes from all the way from Beijing and somehow of a knock-on effect on businesses and the model here in Macau.
Well, as you know, Macau and Hong Kong are both SARs, and yet they behave so differently. Mm-hmm. Hong Kong has had the freedom, has been punished for, and has sometimes been rewarded by being less reliant on mainland China for its economy, and as a result, it's adapted. It's come up with its own fight with COVID, which for a couple of years was pretty terrible, and as a matter of fact, it can actually survive much better. Macau, unfortunately, is beholden to mainland China. So politically, it has no power. The chief executive of Macau cannot adopt the Hong Kong's policy when it comes to going it alone, deciding to open something. So we are going to basically follow whatever China says, because most of the government revenues come from gaming, and 70 to 80% of gaming comes from mainland Chinese. So unfortunately, whatever China decides to do, whatever the government of mainland China does, we have to basically follow, which would mean COVID zero is going to continue until Beijing says no, in which case we just have to follow.
Vitaly, when you like, of course, I mean, we're talking about a private business, and it has to have a business model that is that adds up. But with all these social and political contacts that we've got nowadays, how do you expect gaming concessionaires to adjust to the new era?
Well, look, I think at this stage, it's very unclear what direction Macau is going to be able to take, right? Because we don't know what's going to happen in China over the next 12 to 18 months in terms of China's government's willingness to open the borders, let people come to Macau. Obviously, we know where the junkets stand, right? So we can wash that business out. That business is gone. But the opportunity for mass and premium mass remains very high. But it all boils down to whether the Chinese government will allow people to come. And it's not just visas, it's also the ability to come here unfettered with respect to moving some money over, frequency, there's a whole host of issues beyond just issuing some visas, right? Or reducing quarantine requirements or something of that nature. And I think at this stage, I'm optimistic that we will get back to a level of business and visitation volumes that we've had in the past at some point. I mean, it's not going to happen next month. It's not going to happen next quarter. But at some point, it is likely, in my view, that China will reopen. They're not going to keep isolationist. But it may take a while to get there. And then when we get to Macau, it really boils down to what is Macau going to be able to do with respect to driving the gaming demand coming out of China. The notion that somehow Macau is going to transform itself into an international destination for gaming is unrealistic in the short to medium term. It's probably unrealistic in the longer term as well, unless the Macau infrastructure and economy is completely transformed, which is not a 2 or 3 year process. Human capital is probably the biggest constraint in Macau. The ability to hire people with expertise, as Alidad was talking about, in various areas is non-existent in Macau. The ability to hire low-level labor at a cost that makes sense from other jurisdictions is extraordinarily difficult in Macau. And in the end, you guys live in Macau. In the end, Macau is a very, very small place, right? So it's a combination of the government of Macau having to work with operators to create an environment that's conducive to expanding the economic footprint of Macau and to not solely rely on gaming. The reality is, and everyone can talk a big game, the reality is Macau is completely dependent on the gaming industry, right? It just is. And the gaming industry should actually be a driver of further diversification in Macau because it provides the government with an enormous revenue stream and the ability to actually encourage development, encourage business, encourage economic activity in other areas. But that's what the gaming industry should be used for. It should actually be used to grow and allow the government to further diversification. Don't go to the operators and expect them to develop a whole host of things that they have no expertise in, because it's never going to happen. So I think that's where the disconnect really lies. On the Chinese government front, there's really, we can debate all day long about whether the border will reopen at some point and when it happens. Nobody knows. Nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody knows, unless you're sitting in Chairman Xi's head. You're not going to know when any of this is going to happen. So it could be a fruitful discussion, but it doesn't lead to anything. My assumption is at some point the borders reopen and things happen. Then there's a whole other discussion around what does the Chinese economy look like after all of this? Are people still willing to spend money? Is the class of customer that Macau attracts, which is not the 1.4 billion people that live in China. It's probably at most 60 million people in China, and of which a very small fraction would come to Macau. That's the people that we're talking about, right? It's the upper classes, it's the upper middle class and the upper class that can afford to come to Macau. That's your target audience.
Yeah, and this is also obviously related to their disposable income and also the issue of capital mobility and all of that, right?
Absolutely. Look, if somebody's making $5,000 US a year, they're not coming to Macau. Like, that's not a Macau customer. So I think we need to be realistic about what the potential for tourism is. Because look, you can open the floodgates and let in tens of millions of working class, right, lower middle class Chinese from Guangdong who will come into Macau and not spend any money. They'll just congest the infrastructure, and it's not going to be value added to anyone in Macau. So what's the point of doing that, right? The point is, Macau is a very small place. It's a very limited space. There's only 38,000 hotel rooms in Macau. It'll grow a little bit. The 38,000 rooms in Macau that were running at 92% occupancy in 2019, that doesn't give you a whole lot of room to grow unless you get rid of the Macau gaming customer. And if you get rid of the Macau gaming customer, the Macau economy will collapse. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. There is no diversification in Macau. Nothing in Macau exists that could replace the potential gaming economic impact on the city.
I want to second what Vitaly was saying about Macau appealing to people from outside other jurisdictions. Look, dealers are required by law to be from Macau. And dealers, because it's a good position and you don't have to do much, you sit there and it's a pretty good salary, they don't have to be educated. Therefore, they only have to speak Cantonese and perhaps Mandarin. That is not a welcoming. There's not many dealers who speak fluent enough English to be able to attract a Korean, a Japanese, a Singaporean, a Filipino to come to Macau and gamble. So as long as Macau continues to have these areas which require a warm culture, which are welcoming culture, Macau is going to be very cool. Whereas it's a typical Korean, Japanese, Southeast Asian is going to get much better service, customer service, as well as the ability to ask where things are in anywhere but Macau. So Macau appealing to the foreigners is really, really a lot. It's a big ask. I agree with Vitaly. It's just not going to happen. I don't see it.
Thank you. Jorge, I mean, you remember quite well, I mean, from let's say 1980s, 1990s, how the market was in terms of the source of gamblers, and you used to have an important portion of our gambling coming from, of course, obviously Hong Kong, a key market, but also Japan and other places in Asia. Do you see us going back, of course, to some extent, to a bit of that structure somehow?
Look, at the time, I didn't follow gambling. I was not a regulator. My knowledge is public information, but as far as I could dig in when I had to handle the matters, Macau was never a place for gamblers from other jurisdictions outside China, including Hong Kong. But there were some. Now, this said, and in certain cases, it lost even the VIP market for tax reasons. For instance, the gamblers that came and rich people that came, for instance, from Indonesia were lost in the 90s because the casinos in Australia could provide better deals for the junkets. So the junkets started to take those people there. So, but apart from that, where I don't agree necessarily what was said here as regards that, this part, is that nobody can know about this because it was never tried, okay? So I understand that it is not wise to create a model based on replacing the gamblers that come from mainland China, or the customers in general, not only for gambling, but for related activities in resorts, from customers that come from other jurisdictions. But the reality is it was never tried. So this is a positive thing on this tender, and something that I battled for a long time in the Macau Gaming Commission to be done. But the weight of the Macau junkets is huge because they are perceived by the politicians in Macau as the local component of gaming. And although most of them actually are from Hong Kong, they really do not want to go. They don't see any rationale to go beyond China because there was so much to grow in terms of business model. And also because many of them, they have the difficulties that Jorge here referred about for dealers, for instance. Junkets usually don't speak other languages apart from Chinese. So if you ask them to go to other places, they want to do it. But it is, in my opinion, if you put pressure enough on the concessionaires, they will find junkets within the same segments of customers that Vitaly referred, in India, in Southeast Asia, in Japan, in many other places. It is a matter of putting pressure and conditioning. That has never been done in Macau. So in this respect, is it a positive move? Is there potential? I believe there is potential. Now, is it wise to build your, for instance, your budget model in terms of the government or the overall level of revenue based on it? No, but there is potential. And I think that what is being tried is good. The big thing that I'd like here to refer is, I'd like to what was said before. I think there are two things that are important to mention. The first thing is the idea that Macau is very different from Hong Kong, doesn't have critical mass, it's far more dependent from China and the central government. This is all correct. Where's the big difference? The big difference is the idea that then people jump into saying, oh, and because of that, the policy in Macau is defined by Beijing. Now, guys, trust me, I handled this for 10 years. The fact that gaming is a social demon in China inhibits everyone at the political level in China to be interested in defining policy and putting their hands there, okay? For them, it's a toxic thing. So they want to control, they want to supervise, they have complaints here and there, they have to intervene. But usually what I found is they ask things. They ask, they want you to explain, but it has always been the prerogative of the Macau government to be, if you're proactive, you can explain why you're doing this, why you're not doing that, why this sector is complaining, and you can move ahead with reforms. The main complaint I always found from the central government was about the incapacity or unwillingness to move towards the diversification of the economy. And it's difficult. Of course, Macau has a very low level of critical mass of talents, as the Chinese say. But again, was that ever tried? Not really. Even recently, even with the pressure, the possibilities that the financial that are open in the financial sector by the outline development plan of the Greater Bay Area, the government, the first opportunity that they were asked, they said, no, better send it to Hongqing. So it is these that puts the guys in Beijing crazy, and very rightly so. But now they have a problem because they decided to have loyal people, not very intelligent, running Macau. And so the problem that we have today is that when it comes to define policy, it's easy to say, oh, it is defined by Beijing. No, in gaming, it is not defined by Beijing, okay? It is the Macau government that still has a lot of leeway to do, and it's not doing a great job because they don't know, okay? Now, it was said that the first Macau chief executive...
Be optimistic. Sorry, how could you be optimistic? Here you are saying it's not Beijing, it is the Macau government, and they don't know what they're doing. So, and you say you're
no,
also...
I say they're not knowledgeable on gaming, and they don't want to diversify. Now, why am I optimistic? Because Macau has a monopoly of gaming inside China, first. Now, I'm far more concerned, to be very blunt. I mean, the biggest problem, for instance, on VIP gaming, and I'm going there in a minute, is not even anything related to Beijing. It's Thailand. It's between Bangkok and Pattaya. There are 2 or 3 resorts. And even if they don't legalize credit for gaming, but in fact it works, as it used to be the case of Macau before 2001, if this is done, Macau is going to see 50% of its revenue from 2019 to be wiped out and cannibalized by Thailand. So this is not a joke. I mean, this is where I'm worried about. Now, the VIP gaming used to account in 2019 was still responsible for 50%. Now, there's one thing here. Now, books will be written about this, and I'm not really sure if anyone is completely right, but as I perceive it, Sun City and Tash were not prosecuted because of what they did in Macau. They were prosecuted in Guangzhou and in other metropolitan areas of China because they were utterly stupid of targeting through online gaming customers from the mainland. They were repeatedly warned. The Macau government was warned and decided to look to the floor. This is why the gaming inspection needs to be efficient, needs to be run by people of integrity, and especially needs to have people that know how to reason and to understand that they're not only living in that well, that things are interconnected. So, and because 𝐷𝐼𝐿 was not smart, because they continue to target mainland Chinese customers from the Philippines and from other places, and not everybody closed like Sihanoukville, and because huge amounts of betting were involved, the Chinese Public Prosecutor's Office came at them. Now, as far as I know, from the accusation and the charges that were done, at least in Guangzhou for Sun City and 𝐷𝐼𝐿, did not mention Macau. The authorities in China have been very careful about not harming the VIP gaming, not saying that the activities that the junkets do in Macau that involve connections with the mainland are completely illegal. Now, we all know what the Chinese law, what the mainland China law says. So, but they have been careful, even under this leadership, which is very, I agree, it's less neutral, let's put it like that. And it fights all the entities that one way or the other are connected in the mainland with China, with the junkets of Macau. They have been careful. And this is the reason why you see that the Macau government did not change a lot the regulations on junkets. And they really don't know, like any of us, no one knows how this is going to evolve. Is there a guarantee that junkets will not be able to operate, assuming that the borders will be open, say, in January? Nobody knows. I believe that that possibility is there, but it needs to be handled carefully, intelligently, and in a way that it does not provoke social harm and is not visible as it is to be. Now, the problem here is the junket groups, they became so large in Macau that they started to have operations as concessionaires or licensees in nearby jurisdictions. And this is almost inevitable, but the Macau government needs to think about the posture that it has towards them. And perhaps the price to pay is, if you want to have it to be a junket in Macau and to operate inside mainland China, we don't want to take risks, and you cannot operate in any other jurisdiction, period. Or something else, but it has to be thought about how to do it. What does not make sense is to not discuss this and pretend that 50% of the GGR, we'll see how it runs. How can anyone, a company or a government, make any business model or any planning based on this? So, yes, there are lots of uncertainties. But, Vitaly, this I don't agree with you. The VIP market is never going to disappear. Okay? Even when it was unlawful here, and there were people in China fighting it, it did not disappear. The most that will happen is that it may go underground, and that you will find mechanisms which, I mean, let's be blunt, we're speaking as if in China everything is strictly legal. Look at the shadow banking. I mean, this would not be impossible to happen. But is it likely that it happens like that? No. The problem is today there is greater scrutiny, there is greater visibility. All the junkets are all the same for all the groups. This idea that there are good junkets, which are the ones that deal with you, and bad junkets, or the junkets that are in Singapore are good. They are not nothing to do with Macau junkets. When resorts try to create their own network of junkets, they realized, Linda Shen, which is quite competent, comes from that sector, realized it was impossible to do it. So now there are no new wheels to invent here as regards China. What needs to be considered is how gradually you allow this activity to go on in order to avoid having a wipeout of a significant amount of revenue. And this is not only relevant for the groups, it's also relevant for the government. Sorry.
Let me talk about, thank you, Jorge, about revenue and there's a lot of food for thought. Vitaly, in terms of no, I mean, I know these are not the best of times for the crystal ball business, but I think we can project something. You a few days ago, you're saying that the gaming industry of Macau likely won't see a full recovery until 2024. But what could be like sort of, I'd say, allow me to use the buzzword new normal of the gaming industry. If you look, let's say, for instance, of where we are now, if I'm not mistaken, so far, gaming revenue, gross gaming revenue this month, we are like 14% of where we were pre-COVID 2019, January to August. Last year, full year figures, 29% of 2019 and the best post or the best month in terms of GGR since the pandemic hit was May 2021 with just 10.4 billion patakas in gross gaming revenue. Can we kind of make a sort of an educated guess as for what lies ahead in the new context?
Yeah, look, it's a pointless exercise. I mean, we could talk about what the potential is. My view, very simplistically, is that the junket business in Macau is never going to come back. Okay, it's just never going to come back. I disagree with George completely. The junket business has been massively disrupted. It's not going to come back as long as China doesn't want it to come back. And I don't think China wants it to come back. And why it doesn't want it to come back is the following. The junkets made virtually no money in Macau. Okay, this has been a long-standing understanding in Macau that the junkets actually don't make money in Macau. And the operators don't make that much money from junkets, right? The EBITDA margin for junket business in Macau is around 10%. Where the junkets made money was under the table, betting, side betting. They made money overseas jurisdictions where the tax rates are either zero or approaching zero compared to a 40% tax rate in Macau. And the casino operators in those jurisdictions are able to pay double or more the commission that they were being paid in Macau. So this concept that somehow the junkets are all going to rematerialize and come into Macau, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen because I don't think China will allow it to happen. I don't think Macau will allow it to happen. And the operators don't want it to happen, right? If they need it, they'll take it, but they're not going to want it, right? So when we think about what does Macau look like in terms of revenue, that's not the important question. The important question is what does it look like in terms of profitability, right? That's where it's important because mass business, premium mass, base mass combined is a 30% plus margin business. For some operators, it's even better. Junket was 10%. For some operators, it was mid to kind of high single-digit percentage margins. So even though in 2019, 38% or so of GGR came from VIP, and a third of the GGR came from junket, the profitability contribution to the bottom line was less than 15% from junket. Right? It's not a rounding error, but it's inconsequential. The real question is, can you replace that profit with mass and premium mass business? And over time, I believe you can, but you will also need to continue to expand the capacity in Macau and hotel room capacity, which is critically important. George is right with the notion that Thailand is going to potentially open up and it'll take some business. The reality is today in Macau, compared to Macau 20 years ago, the Asian landscape looks tremendously different on two landscapes. The first is on supply. There are many more casino operations across Asia than there were in 2000. And in good locations, right? Korea has expanded and will continue to expand. The Philippines is doing quite well. It's going to continue to expand. Singapore has been realistically a very phenomenal exercise, and that'll continue to grow. So, and then you look at all the Southeast Asian casinos that have popped up. Those aren't going anywhere. They're going to continue to grow. But also, the overall economies and the people's ability to spend money in many of these countries has also been increasing. So the potential demand has been increasing, not just in China, but across all of Asia. So there's a balance, right? And just because Thailand opens up six casinos doesn't mean that the entire business or half the business of Macau is going to disappear. This was the same argument that was made in 2010 when Marina Bay Sands and Resorts World were going to open up. All the business in Macau was going to go to Singapore. Well, no business from Macau went to Singapore. So I think what's important is to focus really on what matters, which is mass market, premium mass market, driving visitation back into Macau, and then thinking about how to utilize 38,000 hotel rooms to drive maximization of revenue for both the government and for the operators. And the reality is, in order to have growth, in order to get GGR back to the numbers that we've seen before, just in terms of gross gaming revenues, which I don't think is going to happen until after 2025, before we can even get to a GGR number anywhere near what we had in 2019, because that junket business is gone, you're going to need more hotel rooms. And we obviously have projects opening up. So, you know, we'll have more hotel rooms in 4 years' time than we had in 2019. That's a positive. We have hotel rooms that are no longer utilized by junkets that can be utilized for premium mass customers. That's a positive. So it's not a simple look at what does the top line look like. Now, from the government's perspective, it's actually more difficult because the government gets 40% tax, whether it's mass, premium mass, VIP, which is unique in Macau relative to other jurisdictions. Most other jurisdictions have a bifurcated tax structure. So I think what's really, really important is to focus on profitability, and that profitability is really driven by the mass market customer and potentially down the road, the integration of more high value and non-gaming amenities that customers would actually pay for.
Jose,
Thank you. Please join it. Yeah.
I recall the day after 𝐿𝐴 was arrested.
I was going to ask you about that. Maybe I don't know if you allow me to jump in, because Vitaly was talking about mass and premium mass, and I remember when I was preparing a follow-up story on that you said that will be a spillover effect from VIP to premium mass, and perhaps not many people were looking at that from that perspective. How do you regard that?
Okay, I agree with most of what, almost everything that Vitaly said. I just want the one area that I have questions about. There's really three segments to Macau. There's junkets, which I agree were not worth much. To the government, it was worth a lot. 30% of their taxes came from it. But to the casinos, only 15% of the EBITDA. That could be replaced with the additional 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 hotel rooms coming in from Galaxy's Phase 3-4, Studio City, all the other properties could join in hotel rooms. That could be replaced by mass. Fantastic. It's the premium mass and the premium direct. The high rollers that are not directly affected by junkets, they are the biggest question mark because they're affected two ways. One, the junkets facilitated the flow of money into Macau because it's not reasonable for a guy to be betting $200,000-300,000 US per hand when we know that that is not the amount he's allowed to bring in. Who brought that over? Those bad, crazy, terrible criminal junkets, you know, the bad guys who are gone. How are the premium mass and premium direct patrons going to bring people? That's a big mystery. And number two, the visas for these group of people are being stopped. The same people that used to come 2-3 times a month, 20 to 30 times a year, that were premium mass and premium direct, they brought their money from junket, but they were able to go get their visas. Those people are being pulled aside and saying, why are you going to Macau? You were just there a couple months ago. And what's happening is they're slow walking those guys. So even if the guy manages to somehow bring the money over, which I doubt if he's going to, probably going to maybe bring half or a third, the number of trips he used to make on a regular basis is going to go from 30 a year in those cases of the high-end, frequently people, to maybe 12 a year. And that's going to have a dramatic effect, which is why I'm not as optimistic as Vitaly as to when the gaming revenue or the EBITDA is going to come back. Mass will come back. When COVID-0 goes back, mass, which is base mass, grind mass, me and you mass, they're going to come back. The mid group of people, I mean, the premium mass, premium direct, question mark, huge question mark. And the junkets, goodbye. Not for the next 10, 15 years. I just don't see if they come. If they come back in the name of junkets, they're really not junkets. A junket that has to report who this person is, the privacy's gone, where the money came from, that's not a junket.
Thank you, Alidad. We have some of our participants joining the conversation, and we do encourage you all to share with us questions, remarks that they'd like to be addressed in this webinar. Jill Rick says the Macau SAR should open the airport to international travel for MICE and tourism. This means Macau airport has to become an international destination and marketed as such. It was going in that direction, but the concession held by Era Macau was renewed, and the Macau SAR is keen to see an international business development. Of course, this brings us to the bigger question of luring international visitation. So we need not only infrastructure, we need connectivity. Anyone wants to share 2 cents on this matter?
Look, I think this notion that somehow Macau can become a MICE destination is ridiculous. Okay, just very simply, it's ridiculous. To run a destination center for MICE, you're going to need in Macau 100,000 hotel rooms. Okay, to run a proper MICE business. Okay, Las Vegas has 150,000 hotel rooms. It runs at 90% occupancy. It has a world-class airport with connectivity to almost every city in the United States and many international cities. The airport sits 10 minutes from the Las Vegas Strip, right? And Vegas is relatively affordable. To try to replicate that in Macau is not going to be feasible. You're just not going to be able to have the connectivity and the hotel room availability in order to run a MICE business that actually is impactful. Could you have MICE? Absolutely. You've had MICE in Macau before. Sands is able to fill some hotel rooms midweek, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays. There's some smaller conventions, absolutely. But to have conventions of the scale that we're talking about in terms of being a top MICE destination in Asia, it's impossible. The other problem on MICE is that the Greater Bay Area is oversaturated with MICE capacity.
Yeah, I was going to bring into the conversation the future development Hongqing and whether this could provide the space that we would need for that.
Well, it could or it couldn't. It depends what's built there and how easy then it is to come into Macau, or is the concept to just have MICE in Hengqin, right, geared towards mainland Chinese customers. I don't know why you'd want to do that, because Zhuhai has an enormous capacity of MICE already, and that's just Zhuhai. That's just right there. You've got Hong Kong, you've got Guangdong, right? You've got other cities across Guangdong that have MICE capacity of scale, right? It's not just MICE. It's not just having an airport that allows a flight to come in from Manila and a flight to come in from Bangkok that's going to give you MICE. You need a whole host of other amenities, and you need hotel rooms. None of that exists in Macau. It just doesn't. So the other question on MICE, if we're talking about general MICE, is, are you going to be able to have MICE business from mainland China of any scale in Macau? And I think the answer is no, because most companies in Macau are not going to want to send people to Macau for conventions. It's still a little bit of a taboo when it comes to this type of travel. So if you're an international business in Asia and you want to hold a convention and your choices are Hong Kong or Singapore or Macau, where do you think most companies are going to go? They're not going to go to Macau. That's the reality of the situation, right? Could it be a small amenity? Sure. Could it drive some incremental visitation midweek? Sure. But it's never going to be of large scale.
What you just said, Vitaly, is what was the predominant thinking in the US, and Sheldon Adelson proved that wrong. Okay?
That's wrong. George, that's wrong. George, that's wrong.
No, that's absolutely right. For his business, I know that his LVS Convention Center is not the largest one in Las Vegas, but it is possible to grow. Now, is there competition? Yes. What we're talking about is the model of Las Vegas, which you keep insisting, is wrong, and I think it's wrong, because we're never going to have in Macau the possibility of having the majority of the revenue generated from non-gaming. I think we can agree on that, obviously. But should we try to have other areas of entertainment, and especially in MICE, growing? Yes. How to do it? Well, clearly, nobody put a pistol on the head of Venetian or LIVS to create the huge investment they made on the convention center and to create the model of operation based on that. Clearly, there are operators that think that it is possible to grow. Now, there should be incentives for that to go on. And that is where the Macau governments, one after the other, failed. If you don't create incentives, everybody's going to, all the managers of any casino gaming group are going to wish to have to maximize the gaming revenue. And 1 square foot of gaming is far more profitable than 1 square foot of any other activity, let alone the MICE activity. But this is why the modeling of a strategy defined is difficult to make, but it should go in that direction. Now, should we expect that the percentage of the MICE activity is going to grow significantly? No, it's not. Should we want to compete with Guangzhou and with Hong Kong and with Singapore? Yes. And mind you, it is true, absolutely true, that many conventions moved from other places to Las Vegas because people wanted to have a good time at the same time that they were doing that. This is not wrong. And now, what we can disagree is that probably it was not Sheldon that invented it, because the large convention center is public, is owned by the municipality, and it worked. But is it possible to increase the level of visitation and to change a bit at least the kind of business that is being generated there? Yes, it is. Yes, it is possible. Now, casino operators don't like that. They don't like that. The casino operators, all of them, they want to maximize profits. And maximize profits is to have the amount of, to have an integrated resort that is balanced enough to bring in customers so that they can gaming. They go to gaming. That's it. Should the public policy be defined in wishing to grow in 2 or 3 other areas? Yes, not 11, not everything. And Macau does not have critical mass, does not have rooms, does not have the capacity to manage all these new areas. Sorry.
So it's okay, it's okay. And actually, I'd like to bring one question from Anthony Lam into the conversation, which regards entertainment. You know, like entertainment as a drive for diversification, the introduction of stage entertainment has also nurtured many skilled workers in the industry. What are your expectations in this respect? That's what Anthony Lam asks. Anyone wants to jump in on the entertainment side of the equation, right?
There's been 2 entertainment attempts. One was Zaya at Venetian.
Yeah.
An attempt, a swing and a miss. One was House of Dancing Water, which was a great hit. That's it. I mean, I don't think entertainment is the reason people are going to go through the hassle of paying more for a flight than to go internally, getting a visa and getting a flight to come in here to see entertainment. There's plenty of these entertainment that could happen in China. So I think the government, comparison to Las Vegas is very difficult. The American mindset, gambling is entertainment. I will go gamble for an hour and a half. I'll go have dinner. I'll go watch a show. Maybe I'll gamble another 30 minutes. If I lose, that's it. That is not the typical Chinese mindset when it comes to gambling. They gamble here because that's the only reason they come to Macau. They don't come to Macau because of the restaurants. They don't come to Macau because of the entertainment. And it's very difficult to get these people who are serious gamers to go and do the Michelin and mice and all these other exhibitions. It's very difficult. And one more thing. I work for the gaming company for Venetian in Las Vegas and Venetian in Macau. Every one of these operators would love to have mice midweek. From Sunday through Thursday night, there's plenty of hotel rooms that they can actually go do that. The problem is the government did not give them enough blue cards to hire the right staff. The airport in Macau is small. You can only have short haul, medium haul. You cannot have long haul. So it's really difficult to get people to come in from the airport when you're 5 minutes away from Hong Kong airport, 5 minutes away from Hong Kong Convention Center versus 45 minutes to come to Macau. Macau has a major disadvantage. It's very difficult to get mice up and running in Macau.
Thank you, Alidad. I would also, maybe you can also join the conversation on entertainment, Vitaly, but meanwhile, we have another question from Rebecca Choi. What about the strategy?
Go ahead, please. On entertainment, I think, the problem in Macau that you have is that the length of visitation, the length of stay in Macau is very short.
Yeah.
First off, half the visitors coming in are day trippers, right? They're in Macau for less than 12 hours. No one coming into Macau for less than 12 hours is going to go spend 2 hours or 2.5 hours watching a show, right? When you have large scale concerts at the Venetian, for example, when we used to have those, you would have hordes of people coming in from Hong Kong to go to these concerts. That works. That model works. One-off concerts, those work. But to have a standing show that costs $100 million to produce, and then have a customer come in and sit there for 2.5 hours when the average length of stay for even an overnight visitor is 1 night, you're just not going to get people to do it because they don't have enough time. That's actually one of the problems. Vegas is such a different animal where people are coming and staying in Vegas for 4 nights, right? The average length of stay in Vegas is over 4 days. You come in for a convention, a lot of people stay for the weekend, right? You have plenty of time to go to a show. You have plenty of time to go to a multitude of restaurants. You have plenty of time to do a whole host of other activities and many of the people gamble, but you have a whole host of time to do everything else. When your length of stay in Macau is 1 or 2 days, it's just not going to happen. So the question around entertainment is, first off, you have to put on entertainment that people want to see, number one. If you're doing acrobatics like Sands tried to do back in the early days of Venetian, there's better acrobatic shows in China. People weren't going to go see that. The water show at City of Dreams was short, right? It funneled people in and out, geared around the casino. People would come in and they would see something they really couldn't see in China. That show worked, right? So it's a question of putting on things that actually work for the market. The concept of putting on, the Michael Jackson show that you have at Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas, which lasts 2.5 hours, that's not going to work in a market where people come in for 1 day. It's just not going to work.
How about any prospect of extending the length of stay? It's not easy, right? It's been consistently like that, right?
Well,
hotel rooms.
The hotel rooms are the problem. Yeah. Even when Alidad was talking about MICE, absolutely, you'd love to have group visitors come in, group guarantee locked in rooms on a Tuesday, on a Wednesday, on a Thursday. But without all that MICE business that doesn't really exist in Macau, it's relatively small, you're still at 90% occupancy. Sure, the weekday, it's lower, it's 80, 82%, that's fine. Okay, you can do a little bit of MICE, but incrementally, you're not gonna be able to do that much until you have a lot more hotel rooms.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions when it comes to all these non-gaming requirements and the 11 points got to do with what if, like we will have the bidders putting forth a lot of ideas and projects for marine development, tourism, sports, wellness, etc., that they may surely potentially have to fulfill as part of commitments. Let's just presume that. But how about, we don't really know from each other, and at the end of the day, we'll have a pretty messy situation. Isn't that a risk? Like if you have to commit to certain projects and then you don't really know where's your competitive advantage and, your business development, because those who are bidding for the concession, they need to put forth all these, at least it should be, to fulfill the points and to come up with all these ideas. Or we shouldn't take it at face value. I know, Vitaly, you want to join here or Alidad?
My pessimism is that, according to George, we are in a ditch, right? We were doing great and now we're in a big hole. Mm-hmm. And we need to get out of the ditch. Unfortunately, the same people who got us into the ditch are the ones responsible for getting us out of the ditch. I'm very pessimistic about how this government is going to be pro-IR. They may not be pro-gaming, but there are 6 integrated resort companies in Macau. They're not 6 non-gaming companies in Macau. They're not 6 gaming companies. There are 6 integrated resort companies. You need the government to partner up with the non-gaming, with the gaming and non-gaming IR operators collectively. You need to give them the lands to build hotels. You need to give them the visas. You need to get them the blue cards. You need to get them the ability for people to come in. And I just don't have enough faith for this government, which keeps saying, gimme, 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 without giving anything back on its own responsibility to go any forward. This is where my...
You're absolutely right. Let me say this. You're absolutely right in the sense that it is necessary that I don't like the idea that casino operators usually reiterate that they are partners with the government because of the high level of taxation. Now, what we need, should speak plainly, is we need a government that understands that whether integrated resorts or concessionaires of gaming, it's a business. A business needs to make money, needs to be profitable. Now, if you allow them to operate with good margins, then you can negotiate and you have the power to impose some things that part of the profits or part of the revenue is then allocated for other purposes. And this should be integrated with the planning decided by the government. Now, when you have, but the key issue, I agree, is that the government must be sensitive to the business scope of things, must have entrepreneurial sensitivity. Now, you have a government of offensive civil servants that are scared as hell because the political situation is very difficult and conditioned by variables that are exogenous and that they cannot control, and they are the government of a small city in China that does not have, never has had a lot of leeway. I understand the difficulty, but if you don't have that entrepreneurial sensitivity, it's going to be very difficult. I fully agree with that. And this is something that has nothing to do with this tender. This is something that is inherent to the way in which the government was chosen, because probably arising from the fears that Beijing had of the incidents that took place in Hong Kong. Now, what does that tell us? That tells us that, yes, the government is going to be, it's probably not going to be very sensitive to things. Perhaps it is wise in this situation to let the managers of the resorts and the groups that have gaming to do some of the things that the government cannot plan nor feels comfortable to undertake the responsibility to do, and probably should. But at the same time, it creates the responsibility creates a responsibility for casino gaming that is not wise in an environment where the government is not sensitive to the business side of this of the venture. So this, in my opinion, this is very, very complicated, and the tender should have never been open at this stage. Now, I know it's too late, but it's with this level of uncertainty, you're never going to have very great commitments. I think that's what we're going to find out. We are going to see, I speak regularly with several people inside several of the groups. I think we're going to have to see a split of all the activities, a legal engineering taking place to split everything in order to safeguard assets. But this is not the way that things should have been done. If you want to diversify, if you want to count on them to diversify, you need to allow them to operate with good margins, and you need them to speak with them about how to define a policy and on which directions you go. Even if it's wrong, even if investment analysts think that too much money should not go into MICE or into museums or entertainment or other things, but if the policy is that, negotiate that. You try to impose something that is against the business nature of the groups, which the financing entities are not going to like, and therefore this is not going to end up well. Yes. This said, the most key factor, because people like to speak about entertainment and Macau as a civil aviation hub and all that is secondary, I agree. But the key issue is something that none of us can guarantee, but where clearly we don't have an agreement, is that I don't think that the junket business, which represented in 2019 probably an overall of 12 billion US, nobody is going to wipe that out and discount that. Nobody politically can do it, nor should do it. And that reality will have, it will be necessary to do some kind of accommodation and to find out how that can work. And remember, if China wanted to give instructions for that to end, it would have given, and that piece of legislation would have been revoked. That was not the case. So we are going to have gaming promotion and gaming promoters operating. They're not going to rebrand themselves and go to operate now in Southeast Asia and Japan and India. So obviously they will continue to operate in China. How that is going to happen, none of us knows. I don't think anyone knows, but this is the key factor that is going to make a significant part of the gaming business of Macau. And the gaming business of Macau is not only the concessionaires, and the level of jobs and the level of and the number of hotels depend on how this part of the policy is accommodated. And regrettably, I don't see many people putting on the table possibilities or options. And this needs to be addressed. This is going to be what is going to determine what is the size of Macau in the coming 5 to 10 years. But nobody wipes out 12 billion US.
Oh, George, of course they do. Look at what happened between 2012 and 2013 and 2016. Right? They wiped out $20 billion of GGR, and only a small fraction of that came back. So to sit here and say that we're not going to have to, we're going to have to look at the junkets and bring them back, I don't think that's going to happen. The government has been very, very clear in China about what the junkets have done that was bad. right? And it wasn't just about online gaming. That was a big part of it. It wasn't just about taking players overseas. That was a large part of it. It's also anti-money laundering. It's also the illicit movement of capital, right? It's also the bad things that come with overextension of debt in a market, in an environment, and in a jurisdiction where giving out gambling debts is illegal. This is the problem with the junket industry. It's not a guy finding a rich guy and bringing him over. That's not a junket. You don't need to do that. A gaming operator can do that. It's moving the money. It's providing credit. It's taking collateral in China. It's forcing the guy to pay you. That's what the junket business does.
Vitaly, I heard almost all the American groups saying, we want to be able to grant credit. We are going to do that, and we're not going to work with junkets. In the end, they all work with junkets.
Well, because the system existed. The system existed
They were
with the
going to do it.
junkets.
Listen, no one is going to take the risk of going to an activity that can create legal issues inside mainland China, to put it mildly, and neither is the government of Macau interested in that, any of it. So that's why there are middle entities that to do that. First. Secondly,
not with the existing government in China. If you're telling me the existing government of China changes and they allow it to happen again, then it will.
Look, I'm a great upholder of analyzing reality, departing from the facts. And what of the facts have been mentioned here. Restrictions on visas, questioning people, increasing the control. But the reality is that the network that exists for the gaming operators, which I'm not saying it's ideal, okay, but the network that exists and which is which moves a GGR of 12 billion. So this, if you make a simple reasoning, assuming that almost all of this is based on baccarat, where the win is 3%, this gives you a huge amount of revenue that is being involved in the betting. I'm not going to get into side betting, but then it would be even bigger. So nobody wipes an economic reality of that kind. That's my point. Okay. Now, the way to accommodate and the number of entities that are linked inside China is probably one of the reasons why the repression took place. Okay. This is not, again, I mean, you say the right things. Macau is not, the operation in Macau is not like in the US, and here gamblers do not come to get entertained, they come to gamble. It's true. But then you don't do the same symmetric reasoning. The way the junkets operate in China has nothing to do with any other market. Nothing. Okay? And even in Singapore, it's difficult to, because they apparently have the junkets there are angels, because we don't know anything about the operation. But in the connections that you need to have, not that much in terms of marketing and promotion, but at the level of collecting the credit, are connections that do not only involve guys with a dragon tattoo here. They involve people with sticks and guns, okay? They involve chiefs of police, they involve military chiefs and so on. This is a huge network. Is it desirable? No. Is it how it works? Yes, this is how it works. Is this going to disappear? No. It's possible that some of the repression was done because some of those generals that were semi-gods in military compounds had to be repressed to strengthen the leadership. Probably. That was used also to curtail the fight on corruption. Yes, but the reality, the economic reality that is underneath all this business is not going to disappear. And it is necessary to think how it's going to evolve and to see if there's anything that can be done in terms of public policy and accommodating that. And Vitaly, look, I met regularly with all the foreign operators, all the non-Chinese casino operators in Macau. They were all too happy not to know what was going on in the VIP areas. They even said this to the anti-money laundering body for Asia Pacific. So that kind of posture is not going to change. Money talks and everything else walks. So if the junket business can—
George, that posture has changed already. With everything that's happened, it's changed already. And the junkets have been migrating their business overseas because the economic reality of doing business in Macau with the Macau tax structure and the AML restrictions that are in Macau relative to places like the Philippines and Laos and Cambodia and other parts of Asia, no one is going to do business in Macau under those terms. That's even assuming that China allows any of this to happen in mainland China.
Vitaly,
that business is dead and it's not coming back.
One more thing. Digital renminbi is coming.
Yes.
It's 5 years away. with digital renminbi, every piece of money that comes into Macau has to be accounted. Where did this come from? Where is your income coming in here? That is going to devastate premium mass, premium direct, and junkets. Now, we don't know whether it's going to be in a 5-year window or the next 10-year window, but I'm telling you, it is going to be very difficult. Junkets are gone from Macau.
No, they are not. Listen, the whole point is that we will see. We will see. But let me tell you one thing. When you say that the Chinese authorities do not want it, or when Vitaly says, well, they are migrating to other jurisdictions. I have been hearing this for 15 years regarding Korea or the Philippines. The level of migration is small.
That's not true. That's not true, George. The level of migration is not small. Look at the VIP revenue being generated in the Philippines. Look at it at Naga, in other parts of Cambodia. Look at Korea and add it all up. And look how much business has left.
I'm talking about 2019. It is small. Up to 2019, it is small in overall. You need to have a destination that really has the potential to be appealing for the junkets, for the customers of the junkets.
0% tax rate is very appealing for any junket and any VIP player that plays on commission.
And why do you think we're going to go back to 2019? Alvin Shah was arrested in 2021. Levo was arrested in February 2022. We are not going to go and put the genie back in the bottle, right? That is just not going to happen.
Again, I repeat, the accusations are not based on Macau gaming. The only accusations that were done was in Macau because the Macau government felt so uneasy that the public prosecutor's office had to come with those dozens of accusations in 48 hours. But the point is, in mainland China, if there was a willingness to curtail the activity, that would have been done, and the Macau government would have received instructions, and the legislation would have changed. Period. That's my point. Okay, they did not receive some instructions. The legislation on junkets was almost not changed. Everybody wants to assess the situation. Is Alvin Shah
still in prison? Is Alvin Shah still in prison? Please let me know. It looks as though he must have been released the way you're talking about it. So everything's back to normal.
No. Look, the good thing about the junkets is if 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 of them have a problem, the position in the market will be occupied by others. I don't think that is not a problem for Macau. The problem of Macau is to understand if the central government has a problem with the existence of Macau junkets or not. Okay, and up to now, in my opinion, there's not a clear-cut decision. Are there restrictions to limit the number of visitors and the frequency? Absolutely. I agree, that is a fact, okay? The rest, if there were instructions, you would have seen that in the amendment of legislation, and that has not taken place, okay? It's just my point. So everybody's thinking about how not to lose those 12 billion of gaming revenue, and how to do things in a way that can accommodate everybody. Because junket operation.
At this stage, nobody's worried about the 12 billion of VIP. They're worried about the 24 billion of mass. That's all they care about. Every single operator in Macau, that's all they care about. This overemphasis on $12 billion of junket business is actually a rounding error to the profitability of the industry.
Talking about the operators, and actually this is a burning question, perhaps a sort of, I wouldn't say an elephant in the room, but the point has got to do with the fact we're 6 days away from the 14th of September, the deadline for submitting the bids for the gaming concessions. And of course, and here we have a question by Macau Business Senior Gaming Analyst Antonio Lobo Villela. Will we see any player aside from the current Big Six bidding for a concession? Who wants to make a guess? Will there be a dark horse?
I already answered that in the Q&A in the chat. I'm not sure if everybody saw it, but there's just quick answer. 2 reasons. No, there will not be a new operator. A, where are they going to build? I don't think parcels 7 and 8 across the street from Studio City is going to be given to anybody. And 2, we have a 10-year concession. It's going to cost you 3 or 4 years just to build, and perhaps $4, $5, $6 billion to build one. Who's going to go ahead and spend $5, $6 billion and only get 6, 7 years of guaranteed continued life? Because as far as we know, 10 years from now, it may be taken away. So I just don't see anybody in parcel 7 and 8, any 7th or 8th concession coming on.
Vitaly, your take on this?
Well, we know there's going to be 6 concessions, and we know that there are 6 operators, and I find it very implausible that one of the 6 is not going to get a concession. So will you get other bidders? I don't know. It's
Yeah.
possible. You could always have other, like, you know, Alidad and I could put a bid in. I mean, now it's a little bit too late,
It's
but like,
doable.
you could put a bid in. The question is like, is anyone going to win? And I think the answer is no. No one else is going to win.
George, a linked question here, connected question is put forth by Wendy Tong. Will we see any chance of somehow, you know, a bidder linked with a state-owned company to try and, you know, join the tender?
No, neither a state-owned enterprise nor a large.
I mean, I think maybe it could be sort of
even a
figurehead
private,
for a
even a
state.
private group from China. No Chinese mainland group can come to the tender. Period. Okay, no, but especially SOE, it's completely possible.
Of course.
I tend to agree with my colleagues in terms of the number of tenders. I wouldn't exclude, however, the possibility that an already existing group, large one, that always has had an interest on having a footprint in Macau may want to come to the tender. Now, if the I didn't follow it completely, but if the scoring weight has been defined, which I didn't see, if it is similar to the one on the last tender, and if it gives 50% or something similar to the ability to raise gaming revenue, because that's what is inherent to the legal nature of the casino gaming concession, then the Macau government will never risk a new operator vis-a-vis one that already exists. So I tend to think that even if anyone comes, it will be one or two. I'm thinking about entities like Harrods or like entities that have the capacity to and in interest on having a foot in Macau, and they always wanted to. But I don't think that at the end of the day, that will be the case. But again, it is important to see the scoring weight. I didn't see that anywhere, but it's probably my fault.
A question, well, we have some 10 minutes left before we wrap up our session. We have a question here from Macau-based lawyer Pedro Cortes. The conversation is based upon the fact that gaming will continue to be legal in Macau. What if, with a black crystal ball, the policy changes and gaming is no longer legal beyond 2035, when the 10 plus 3 years of the new concessions end?
First of all, a black crystal ball, you can't see through the crystal ball. So that's one of the challenges.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure of that. But that is the doomsday scenario that my dear pessimistic friend Pedro Cortes always says, the anti-George. We got George who's very, very optimistic today, and we got Pedro who's very pessimistic. I seriously doubt that's going to happen. I think there's a very, very small possibility. Macau will eventually become mass. That's the extent by which they're going to go through with it. I think Macau will just become mass, maybe base mass. China will exert more and more pressure on the premium and the high limit areas. And that's the worst case scenario, which I just don't see it happen.
Yeah. Vitaly, I mean, will you have something to share with regards to this?
Yeah, I think there's a scenario where that could happen. That scenario is China becoming isolationist, getting rid of capitalism, closing the border, and basically saying, Macau, go back to what you were before, either a black hole operation, or just completely become a subsumed part of Zhuhai, right? That's a possibility. I think it's low probability that happens, but I think that's where that type of scenario with no gaming in Macau comes into being.
Thank you. George.
George, you're on mute.
Sorry, I like the alternative scenarios that Pedro Cortes sometimes puts, but this one seems to me like those risk factors that sometimes appear on the prospectus, like possibility of invasion by the PLA. I mean, I don't see gaming becoming unlawful in Macau, but more important than that, why is that the case? Because although today we are all, we have zillions of news about the possibility of war because of Taiwan and the militarization of the South China Sea and all that. At the end of the day, Macau, after the mess that existed in Hong Kong, Macau needs to be a successful case for China. It is important that it is a successful case. Politically, it is important. Sometimes we forget that the way in which the government became more tough and because of the decoupling with the West and all that, we believe that things have changed. But reality is, no leader of China will want to stay in history for being responsible for bloodshed in the civil war. So the SARs are the best model they have to show that it is possible to accommodate some kind of success and autonomy and preservation of the way of life. Today, I know that it seems a far-fetched thing and that people readjust their expectations, but I don't think that Macau can have any possibility of becoming an autonomous region with a good with a good quality of life for the people that live there if gaming disappeared before 2049. I don't think that is, I would say that most likely things are going to continue. And I'm not, mind you, I'm not over optimistic. I am optimistic in the sense that I learned, is one of the advantages of being old, that in time, that change comes at a lower pace, the lower pace than we think. And I really think that things are going to change slowly after the pandemic, after the lockdowns created by zero COVID policy. I am a great believer that things will be, and everybody will be interested in keeping them as close to the prior operation as possible.
Thank you, Josh. As for anyone who wants to join here? Oh, so yeah, I mean, let's go for a final take. Your concluding remarks. I don't know, Josh, you would like to add something? You were kind of pointing in the direction of what lies ahead. Is there silver lining, and how do you anticipate the coming decade for Macau?
The bigger risks have been pointed out since the beginning. It's the uncertainty arising from the situation in China. Macau is completely dependent on the visitation from China, unlike Hong Kong. But Macau is completely dependent, and therefore it has really the criticism, the dynamic zero COVID policy is really not very fair in the sense that Macau doesn't have any leverage there. When it has 30 cases, they block the border. Nothing works. So Macau will have to follow closely the evolution of China's mainland. We don't. On the other hand, Chinese economy is slowing down. The second quarter was stagnated. The fact that they decided to put the real estate sector in order obviously is not helping in terms of timing. Nobody really knows what is going to happen from here until the end of the year. The party decided that stability is the priority, but we don't really know if the economy is going to grow. Foreign trade data recently gives some hope, but it is possible that in terms of disposable income, this will have an impact even when the borders open and visitation comes back. I think that we should make scenarios on the future based on the entrepreneurial and business reality of this sector, but we should not forget that the wishful thinking that suddenly VIP gaming is going to end because it has very low margins for casino operators is going to be like that. No, this is wishful thinking. It's not going to happen like that, and we are going to have VIP happening in Macau. How is that going to happen? It is still uncertain. It is unclear. But again, nobody wipes out 12 billion US of revenue, and there are many people with vested interest in that regard, starting with the Macau government. This said, the way to do it, unfortunately, should be with a government more sensitive to the business realities and to with entrepreneurial sensitivity. We don't have that, so. We are not. It's very difficult to see how the scenarios will evolve, and I think it's going to be. And I think I'm very curious to see, to be honest, what kind of proposals are going to be submitted, especially for those non-gaming areas.
And we're all
I
very
hope-
curious about that. Very looking forward to.
I hope all the
details.
groups are prudent. I hope all the groups are prudent because they face civil servants that will not have any leniency on the commitments that they make, and even if it destroys the goods of the golden eggs, and this is the biggest risk for Macau.
Thank you. For now, Vitaly, your final take. The goose that lays the golden eggs may not be alive and kicking, but will it weather the storm? What's your concluding remark?
Look, Macau should be able to come back once China moves forward on reopening its economy and reopening its borders. What level of revenue do we get to, and how long does it take, and what winds up happening with respect to new developments, I think is all an open question. The one thing to remember is that the operators are not in the same financial position that they were 5 years ago. They're more levered. They've basically been the social welfare program of Macau for the past 2.5 years. And by the time this is all said and done, 3.5 years, maybe longer. And the reality is to expect any of the operators to come in and start spending billions and billions of dollars on new development in untested waters with respect to new projects is completely unrealistic. I think all the operators are going to be very prudent with respect to what they're proposing. I think it is beyond the realm of reality to expect anyone to come in and start building multi-billion-dollar non-gaming properties in Macau for one major reason, aside from the fact that nobody has the money. Macau hasn't even allocated any land for development. Nobody even knows where things are going to be allowed, right? This is all hypothetical. And this is what goes back to our original, I think George was saying the same thing. The government needs to act as a partner to the industry in order to drive Macau forward in terms of its economic growth, led by gaming and diversifying to other ancillary areas. It cannot be done in a vacuum. It just can't. So until the government actually comes to this realization, we're going to be stuck in the situation where the operators are going to play games with the government is going to play games with the operators, and I don't think a whole lot's going to get done anytime in the near future as a result.
Thank you, Vitaly. Alidad, a year ago in another panel I hosted, you predicted gaming taxes to be raised. And that did happen. Well, slightly, but it did happen. It turned out that you're correct. What else do you see in your crystal ball, and what's your final take on the whole conversation?
I actually see a positive Macau. I'm not being a pessimist. I just want to clarify. Let me give you some numbers. I think the various 6 gaming companies have spent something like 35 to 40 billion US dollars in building the properties in Cotai and there since the 20 years ago. Something between 35 and 40 billion. The good news is, going forward the next 10 years, the amount of capital expenditure to build these new properties is going to be minimal. There's going to be a couple of phases here, maybe 3 or 4 billion. So they're going to basically live on these existing beautiful integrated resorts that are well maintained. In 2019, the collective 6 gaming companies made $9 billion US in EBITDA. That's earning before interest. Think about it as net profit. Forget GGR, I'm not going to get into that conversation. So $9 billion was made in profit from these gaming operators, of which about maybe 1.5 billion was coming from junkets, given their very low margin. So I think that 9 billion can be achieved. There's a distinct possibility that 5, 6, 10 years from now, the numbers will go back up to the 9 billion. I'm not as optimistic as Vitaly about how soon that happens. And that could be compensated by the additional room capacity, by the additional the hotel rooms, and by the new dictate of the Mainland China government, Macau government, to go ahead and spend more money on non-gaming. So that junket hole, which is considered unhealthy, will be filled by the non-gaming and the more healthier mass. The uncertainty lies whether or not it's premium mass and mass. So I think there's a 50-50 chance that 10 years from now, we'll be back at the current 9 billion EBITDA numbers as we see. I think there's a 30-40% chance that because of the premium mass and premium direct going down, we're going to have maybe $6 billion, which is still significant given the fact that they're not going to spend that much more money on additional numbers. So I see the future of Macau not as rosy as Vitaly sees, but I see a bright future. Will Macau be as dominant as it used to be? No. Philippines going to go bigger. Korea is going to get bigger. Japan's eventually going to come into the picture. Singapore, Thailand. There's going to be a lot more competition. So I don't see Macau changing colors in terms of who it caters to. It will continue to be catering mostly for the mainland Chinese.
So you're long on Macau.
I'm long on Macau, but I'm not super long on Macau. I just think there's a big possibility that they're going to go make 2/3, maybe half, 2/3 of what they made, which is still astronomical. $9 billion profit per year is amazing. So even half of that tree, one tree is going to have half the yield, is still a lot of apples that are going to come out of that tree. It's still enviable compared to any other property, any other jurisdiction, including Las Vegas.
Thank you very much for your final take, and thanks a lot. It's time for us to wrap up this exciting webinar. Thank you so much, you three guest speakers, experts who joined us kindly, Jorge, Costa, Oliveira, Vitaly, Umansky, Alidad, Tash. Thank you very much for this free flow and exciting talk on such a pivotal matter for all of us and for the city and the region. Thank you very much, France-Macau Chamber of Commerce, for this cooperation. Thank you, Rutger and the whole team of FMCC, Stephanie, and all of you. You may stay tuned to Macau News Agency, Macau Business and Business Intelligence. We will obviously be reporting about this talk and also about what is going to happen in the coming weeks. These are critical and also exciting times for Macau. Thank you, and thank you all those of you who joined us via Zoom and shared your views, comments, and questions. Thanks a lot, and see you next time. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you, panel.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.